In this video, we are going to learn about the analog scale on the Sekonic light meter. We're first going to learn about the basics, why it's there, what it does, and then we're going to take all of that, put it into practice, go into the studio, get a model in, and show you exactly how this works in real life. So at a high level, what is the analog scale? Well, it does a couple of things. The first is we can show our measured value on a scale based on what we are measuring. So we could have a scale of aperture values, of shutter speeds, or lux, or foot candles. Whatever it is that we're metering, we can show that on a scale to see exactly where our measured value lies. We can also use the memory button over here to plot different values on a scale. So we can look to see what the darkest value is, what the brightest value is, and sort of make sure that everything falls within a dynamic range of our camera. We can also look to see, if we're using a flash, how much light is from our flash and how much is from the ambient light. And so we can make sure we get a nice proper mix if we're shooting on location, or if we want to eliminate any problems from ambient light or color shifts from color temperatures from different light sources. We can get rid of all of our ambient light and only have flash, or get a nice natural mix. If we have calibrated our meter and set a profile to our system, our camera and our sensor and our lens, we also have this scale at the bottom here that shows us the dynamic range of our camera, where the clipping points are. We can set our midpoint, and then we can start looking at the dynamic range of our scene, metering things either with incident light or reflected light. We can combine both of those things. We can plot everything out. We can see if there are issues in our scene before we even take a photo with our camera. So to see all of this stuff, I want to walk through the menus and show you how to use this functionality before we zip over into the studio. So I'm going to lock this down on my table, get a camera overhead, and we're going to walk through this stuff. It's pretty simple. Let's get started right now. Now I have my meter locked down, so I'm going to put it right here, big, bold, and beautiful, so you can see what I'm seeing. By default, the analog scale is going to show us the values on a scale of whatever it is that we are metering. So right now I have my meter set to ambient light mode, and I have it in shutter priority mode. So I have my ISO and my shutter set up. The meter needs to solve for the aperture value. So when I take a meter reading, there's my aperture value, and down here on the analog scale, you can see how the aperture falls on that scale, from the widest aperture to the smallest aperture. And so as I move this around, you can see that that is showing on the scale where that is. So whatever it is you're metering, that's what's going to be on the scale. So for example, if we take this and put it in aperture priority mode, now I have my ISO and my aperture value. It's solving for shutter speed. So the scale is going to show shutter values. If I put this to lux, it's going to show me lux values. Or if you have foot candles set up for your meter, however you have your meter set up, whatever it is that you are metering on the scale by default, that's what's going to show up. Now, at this point, all we're seeing is where our value is on a scale. It's not very useful. So we're going to learn about plotting different values and using dynamic range and a bunch of different things. And so to do that, what we're going to do is I'm going to change my metering mode to radio triggering mode. I do have a flash here set up, so when I meter my light, I can see the proper aperture value is 6.3. And also right over here, I can see the percentage of light that's coming from my flash versus the light that's coming from the ambient light, all my video lights that are on right now. And so what I would like to do is, on my scale, I'd like to see what that mix is. So it's very, very easy to do this. I use this all the time in the studio. I just touch the analog scale, and now we can see the orange line is showing us how much light is coming from the ambient light. The blue line is showing us how much light is coming from our flash. Right now, well, we have too much ambient light. We need to eliminate that. And so what would we do? Well, let's take the ISO, let's take that down to maybe something that we'd use in a studio. So ISO 200, and maybe let's take our shutter speed up to something we'd use in the studio at 200. So now we can see that the aperture value is 1.8. That's probably too wide. So what I need to do is increase the power of my flash. Luckily, I have a radio trigger here, so I can go in and let's increase this from 1/28 all the way up to maybe half power, something like that. That looks pretty good. Yeah, so we'll do half power. I like that. I like it to be exact. Okay, half power. So now, when I go back here, take a meter reading, we'll do that a couple times, make sure the flash is recharged. You can see that we are now at a value of 6.3. Our aperture has shrunk really a lot smaller. our ISO is much lower, our shutter speed is faster, and on our scale you can see that there's just not enough ambient light to even make a difference. So 100% of our light is coming from a flash, and so that's the first value of the analog scale. We can just push that to show, we can push that to show the balance of ambient light to flash and see the ratio. So maybe you want to have 50-50 or 70-30, whatever it is, you can now use that analog scale to have that show up. That's really cool. You can also do something that is even more advantageous, and that is if you have profiled your camera and ISO and lens, if you've created a camera calibration and loaded that into your meter, you can use that on the scale and you can set a mid-tone. So you can take a reading and then lock that in and then plot values above and below that to see if the scene that you're looking at, the darkest areas and the brightest areas, are within the dynamic range of your camera. So we're going to do that right now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a flash reading, and it's 6.3. It could be whatever it is, 8 or whatever the flash is firing. But let's say this is a proper exposure in a scene, perhaps with a model, and it's on the model's face. And I want to say that's the proper exposure. But is the background too dark? Is the light coming through the window too bright? How would I know? So what I can do here is I can hit my little wrench. I can go in and I say set mid-tone. And I can set that from a memory value. We haven't taken anything and put it in memory. Or I can use that from the current measurement. I'm going to say current measurement. So now I have a mid-tone value. In other words, this is my anchor. This is what is a proper exposure. Now let me go around in that scene and see if things are too dark or too bright. Now what I can do is if I push that analog scale, so before it just turned on and off the ambient versus flash. Now, when I push that, bonk, look at that. I get this really cool scale. You might recognize this from the charts and stuff that we created in the previous videos on calibrating our meter. Those are now in our meter because I'm using a profile that I created. I can see the dynamic range of my camera. So anything in the red is either too bright or too dark. Everything that's in the orange is where I've said this is the clipping point where the brights are going to start blooming and shadows are going to get muddy and noisy. So I want to stay within the green. So what I can do now is I can go and take a reading. So I'm going to take a reading that's much darker. So I'll take that reading and look on the scale, it's showing me that it's in the orange, saying, hey, warning, you're still going to get some darks there, but it's going to be a little bit muddy. If I go even to the other side, let's see if that goes, yeah. So now that's in the red. It's saying this isn't even going to show up. It's going to be totally black. I can start seeing where different values lie on my scale. Now, obviously, if I was doing this in the studio, I would be doing this where I'm walking around and metering different areas. I can use the reflected light metering as well. So the other thing that we can do is we can start now using our memory button to put markers on our screen. So I'm going to push the opposite side here, put the current value in memory. Let's get a little bit less light. I'll put that in memory. I'm going to get way less light. Put that in memory. I'm going to move over here, see what that looks like. Put that in memory. And you can start seeing that we're showing things up on the scale. Now for me, the analog scale, that's pretty good, but I really want to see something that's relative. I don't want to see exact values. I want to see relative values, brighter or darker than my normal standard exposure. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change that analog scale to an EV scale, exposure value scale. I want to see what my midtone is, whatever I've measured, and I want to see anything that's brighter or darker than that to see if I have problems. Plus, it's easier to read. So the first thing I want to do is go into my little wrench, go to the second screen, clear all those memory values. So let's just clear everything out so we have a clean slate. Then on the menu button, I'll click that. It says Set Analog Scale. So I'm going to push on that, and I'm going to change from my measurement scale to an EV scale. And close and close. Now, see, that scale is much larger. Now we're just seeing everything in relative values. So let's do that again. I'm going to take a reading here. So this is the flash that's firing. I'm going to go into my little wrench. I'm going to say set the midtone from the current measurement. Now, if I had values in memory, I could choose one of my memory values, but I'm just going to choose what I just measured. Now, let's see Let's pretend I'm walking around to the darkest area in the scene. I'm going to move my Lumisphere to emulate that. I'll take a reading, and notice it doesn't even show up. It's off the scale. It's totally black. If I move this to get a little bit more light, you can see, okay, that's one stop under. I'm going to put that in memory. I'm going to move this down a little bit more, take another reading. Now we're seeing we're getting into our clipping point. Do that. Notice how we're metering these out, measuring them on the scale. I can even go in, let's make that flash a little bit brighter. Maybe we can make it a little bit brighter. Let's go in and see if we can get it to full power. Okay, full power. Take a meter reading, let the flash recharge. There we go. Now I'll put that in memory. Okay, now on our scale here, you're seeing the brighter values, the darker values relative to that middle gray that we set. So I took a value, said this is a proper exposure, then I can walk around and I can meter different parts of the scene to see if they're over or underexposed or in the areas that are going to be clipping. I can do that in two ways. I can do that with an incident meter reading by just walking around, or I can stand at the camera and I can use my reflected metering and just look through like a scope of a rifle and say, how about this? Click, how about this? Click, put it in memory and take a look to see if I have any issues. Now this is all theoretical. So what I want to do is put this into practice. So we're going to hop over into the studio and bring in a model and do this in real life. Now we're in the studio and we're going to put all this stuff into practice. And so joining me is Tasi. And so the first thing I want to do is show you exactly what this lighting setup is. I've already got almost everything set up, but what I want to do is I want to have this be totally black, and then I want to have this over here to be white, and then I want to have Tasi sort of splitting the difference so we have this really high contrast look. But I'm not sure if my lights are set up correctly, so we're going to use the meter and all the things that we learned using the analog scale to get everything set. But before we can do that, let me give you a tour of all of these lights and how this is supposed to work. Let's take a look from the position of our camera. You can see that Tasi is splitting the difference between the black paper and the light gray paper. So hopefully this black paper right here is going to be totally black, and this light gray paper right here is going to turn white or close to white, and then we'll have that split difference with Tasi right in the middle. So our key light is right here. It's illuminating Tasi, but I have a grid on this light, and so the strategy is for that light to only hit Tasi and not this black paper, so that the black paper will be totally black and we're going to illuminate Tasi. Now back behind that black paper, we have another softbox. This softbox is illuminating this light gray paper. And so when we look at that from the position of the camera, this should turn very light, almost white, and this should be completely black, and we'll have that black and white look that looks really cool from the position of our camera. We might have some problems though. So specifically, I want to make sure that the light that's falling on this light gray is nice and consistent, because if I have the light to the side a little bit too much, what's going to happen is we're not going to get a nice consistent light. We're going to have a hot spot and a dark spot, and it's just not going to look very good. So we need to make sure that we fix that. So now that we know what we're trying to do, let's get shooting. Well, the first thing I want to do is to meter Tasi and set my midpoint. So that's going to be where we sort of anchor ourselves. So I've got this, I'm going to meter right toward this light, and spot on. So I want to shoot at a wide open aperture at 2.8, and look at that. So we got lucky, it's right at 2.8. The thing that I'm looking at here though is in the studio we have not only our still lights, we have video lights all over the place. I need to make sure that they're not going to influence these photos, and I'm a little bit afraid at 2.8 some of these video lights are going to creep into our shot. But I'm looking here on the scale, you can see that I have a 100% mark, and on the bottom here I don't see any ambient light showing up, which means that where Tasi is, we only see light from a flash. In fact, I can meter maybe right here, and yeah, you can see that red line? That's showing me the video light, and we're not getting anything from the flash. And so I can see in the studio if I'm getting any light pollution. So I'm gonna go back here, meter again. So right at 2.8, exactly where we were before. And then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put that in memory, because I want to remember exactly what that is. Now we have to work out some other things in this lighting setup. We need to make sure that the grid on this key light is in the right place, because we don't want this light to be too far over where light is spilling on the backdrop there. And the other thing we have to do is we have to figure out the light on this light gray. We have to make sure that the softbox that's behind there is in the right place so we get a nice, soft, even illumination. Because if we're too much side light, we're going to see the waves in the paper. And so we can check all of that in our meter. And so let's start. So I have set this value, 2.8 in memory. Now I'm going to set my midpoint. So I'm going to go in here and say set midtone. So there it is, set midtone right there, click. And it's going to say, what do I want to do that? And so I've got all these choices here. So I'm going to say set from current measurement. So that 2.8, so that's the midtone. And now I can see above and below where things are going to fall on my scale. In fact, this scale right here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on it, click, whoops, click right there. And I got to unclick that, watching this on a video camera. There we go. Now I can plot things out on this scale to see if the black is absolutely black and if we have a consistent illumination on that side. So to do this, I'm going to change to reflected light mode. So I'm going to switch over here to reflected light mode. So I'm going to click on that. And then I'm going to look through here and then I'm going to meter the reflected light off of this black and off the white and to make sure that things work just fine. So the first thing I'm going to do is check to see from the position of my camera if the black is black. Okay, I'm going to put that in memory, and then I'm metering over here on the light gray. I'm going to put that in memory, and now I'm going to go back to incident light. Look at that. We can see on the scale that our black is going to be black, and we can see over here that light gray is going to be about a stop over what Tasi is, and so we're going to get not complete white, we're not going to get a blown out look, we're going to get a high contrast image. That's exactly what I want. So I'm looking at this, it looks like the setup that we did originally, I just got lucky. I'm not going to have to move this around. We have a nice high contrast image, and Tasi is going to be evenly exposed because we know the midpoint is on her, and so we know our exposure is good. The other thing I want to do though is I want to make sure that everything is good on this backdrop right here. And so what I need to do is I need to clear out my memory and move the light around if necessary. So what I'm going to do is go here and I'm going to click memory clear. So I'm going to click memory clear right there. And then I'm going to say all right there. So do you want to do all of that? Yes. So I'm going to hit OK. So everything's cleared out of memory. I've got a clean slate. So now for this, what I'm going to do is I'm in incident metering mode, and I'm just going to take a meter reading toward the camera, put that in memory, move over here, put that in memory, go up here, put that in memory, go down here, just metering around on this paper. And what I want to see, I want to see all of my values very, very close together. They should be very close together because that means the illumination across that is consistent. And when I look at this, they are not close together. They're all over the place. What that means is the illumination on that background, we're seeing the waves. I'm going to prove it out. So let's take a photo. So put one finger up just so we know. Put the other finger up. So on the, there you go. And I'll take a photo. In fact, I'm going to move this to the side so we see a little bit more of that background. There we go. Yeah, so when we look at that photo, you can see that we have issues on the background because of the position of the light. It's too much side light. So we need to fix that. Let's do that next. How do we fix that? Well, come back here. I'm going to go to this camera. This is the reverse angle. And the problem is when I go back here to this softbox, you can see that the position of this light is too much on the side. It's too much side light. I need to move it over this way as close as we can get so that instead of side light, we're getting more front light. And more front light is going to hide those ripples in the background. So now let's do the same thing again. So I'm going to take this. I'm going to make sure that I clear all the memory. Clear memory, yes, clear all of it. Okay, so everything's cleared out. And now I'm going to do the same thing that I did before. I'm going to meter this, meter here, meter here, meter here, meter here. Just metering around, taking these readings. And now, by moving that light, we can see everything is pretty darn close. And so let's check to see if our math has worked out. So put a 2 up, click, and we can see that the camera agrees with our meter. We can see what's going on that scale, and we have a nice even illumination. So let's review what we just did. The first thing I did is I went over here, I metered to the key light, and I made sure that my value was where I wanted to be, 2.8. Now I did that before the video started to save some time, but I made sure that we had a good midpoint on Tasi. The second thing that I did was I metered to see where things fell on my dynamic range to make sure that the black is black and that light gray is light gray. So I did that by setting a midpoint and then using my reflective metering to meter all the different spots. And I was checking to see, yes, this is black. It's falling in the dark end of the scale. Yes, this is about a stop overexposed from where Tasi is. It's that light look that I wanted. We are getting the high contrast background, exactly what I want, perfectly exposed Tasi. Now, all we have to do is shoot. So, are you ready to shoot? Okay, let's shoot and I'll show you the results. Fantastic, awesome photos. Thank you so much, Tasi. Don't forget, this is part of a series of videos about metering with Sekonic light meters, how to calibrate, how to use the analog scale, how to manage all of your custom profiles, all that stuff. So I've put links in the description of this video to those other videos, plus some bonus videos. Also links to Tasi's Instagram so you can see more of the wonderful work that she does. You're such a fantastic model. And some videos that we did previously that I absolutely love. So don't forget to like and subscribe. And if you really want to dive deep into more studio lighting, you might want to consider becoming a member of this channel for long form, deep dive educational videos. Thanks so much for joining me, and I will see you again next time.